5 men vanished into the snowy mountains of Northern California, without a trace. Their car was found abandoned, their bodies discovered months later, scattered across the wilderness. But one of them was never found. Not then, not now. And inside a locked trailer, a man starved to death, surrounded by food, warmth, and help. What really happened to the Yuba County Five? A basketball game, a wrong turn, a mystery that still haunts investigators and families to this day. This is not just a disappearance. This is a descent into the unexplainable. This is the chilling mystery of the Yuba County Five.
Welcome to The Silent Witness, where we highlight true crime news, unsolved mysteries, unfold chilling stories and events around us to educate and provide information on how we can stay proactive, informed, be security and safety conscious in our environment. The Silent Witness is your go-to destination for gripping accounts of real-life crimes, missing persons, cold cases, and unexplained events. Want to support us and appreciate our craft? Click like, comment, and hit the subscribe button now. Please note that all related materials referenced in this video were majorly sourced from either official court or police documents, reference statements, or other reputable sources, weeding out the speculation theories and unverified information.
They weren't supposed to be the kind of people who vanished. Not them. Not in a place like Yuba City. Not on a night like that. It was February 24th, 1978. A crisp Friday evening filled with anticipation. 5 friends, Ted Weiher, Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, Jack Hewitt, and Gary Mathias, piled into Jack's 1969 Mercury Montego. They were headed to Chico State University to watch a basketball game. But it wasn't just any game. These young men were athletes themselves, members of a team for the developmentally disabled called the Gateway Gators. The very next morning, they were scheduled to play in their own Special Olympics tournament in Sacramento. This game was a night of fun before their big day. Each of the 5 came from loving, deeply concerned families in Yuba City and Marysville, California. They weren't drifters or troubled youth. They were well known in their neighborhoods, familiar faces at the grocery store, the church, the local park. Ted Weiher, 32, was quiet and deeply kind. He lived at home with his parents, surrounded by the comforting rhythms of family. Ted had a mild intellectual disability and often relied on his mother for daily tasks. He adored his young niece and doted on her constantly. He loved listening to the radio and spent hours organizing items in his room. A gentle giant at 5 feet 11 inches, Ted was a key player on the Gateway Gators. Jack Madruga, 30, was fiercely independent. A proud U.S. Army veteran, he was discharged honorably after serving in Vietnam. Despite having a mild learning disability, Jack had his driver's license and was trusted with the Mercury Montego that took the 5 men to Chico that fateful night. His parents described him as responsible and patriotic. Jack had recently landed a job at a snack foods company and was excited about his future. Bill Sterling, 29, was deeply spiritual. He loved reading the Bible and often spent hours in the public library. His family said he was sensitive and generous. He once gave a homeless man his own lunch. Bill had a deep moral compass and believed in kindness above all. He lived with his parents and was considered the quiet thinker of the group. Jack Hewitt, 24, was the youngest and the most innocent of the 5. He had a moderate developmental disability and the emotional capacity of a young child. He loved comic books, cartoons, and anything involving superheroes. Jack was incredibly close to his mother and often sat beside her, giggling at TV shows. He was affectionate and trusted his friends like family. Gary Mathias, 25, was the outlier of the group. A U.S. Army veteran like Jack Madruga, Gary had been diagnosed with schizophrenia after being discharged from the military. But in recent years, he had stabilized through consistent medication and support from his family. He lived with his parents and had been helping out at his stepfather's gardening business. Gary was charismatic and witty, often joking with his friends and lifting their spirits. That Friday night, They drove 50 miles north to Chico, buzzing with excitement. They watched the basketball game, cheered for the players, and enjoyed every moment. Afterward, they stopped at a Bears Market convenience store around 10 p.m. and bought snacks. Pies, chocolate bars, sodas, and milk. Then they got back into Jack's car and disappeared. The next morning, their families panicked. These men weren't rebels or risk-takers. They had strict routines, especially Ted and Jack Hewitt, who relied heavily on structure. When none of them showed up for their Special Olympics game, panic turned to dread. Calls were made. Neighbors alerted. By Sunday, law enforcement was involved. The Montego had vanished without a trace. Their families were gripped by a sense of urgency that law enforcement initially didn't share. Officers treated the case as missing persons, not foul play. But their parents knew something was very, very wrong. On February 28, 1978, 4 days after the men disappeared, Jack Madruga's Mercury Montego was found. But not by police. It was discovered by a forest ranger in a remote location deep in the Plumas National Forest, 70 miles from Chico and far off their planned route home. It was stuck in the snow on an unpaved mountain road near Oroville. The Montego was strangely pristine. It wasn't wrecked. It hadn't slid off the road. The tires weren't deeply embedded in the snow. In fact, a group of investigators determined that 5 grown men easily could have pushed the car free. Yet they hadn't. Inside the vehicle were empty food wrappers from the convenience store, chocolate milk cartons, wrappers, snack cake boxes, all evidence that the men had indeed made it safely out of Chico. But then, something had led them dramatically off course. Instead of heading south back to Yuba City, they had driven northeast into freezing wilderness. No one could explain it. The Montego's doors were unlocked. One window was rolled down. The keys were missing. But strangely, the car had a quarter tank of gas left. There was no indication of foul play or a struggle. The tires weren't deflated. The undercarriage was undamaged. A state patrolman said he'd driven the same route in a similar vehicle without difficulty just days earlier. But what disturbed everyone most? The location. The road the car was found on was treacherous even in the summer. In February, with snowbanks flanking either side, it was borderline impassable. Locals didn't even dare it. So how and why did 5 men, some with cognitive challenges, make their way to such a hostile, unfamiliar place? One possible clue: maps of the region. Gary Mathias' stepfather believed Gary may have known the road from previous trips to visit friends near Forbestown. Could Gary have convinced the group they were taking a shortcut? Or could something more sinister have happened? Authorities canvassed the area around the car. Snowmobiles, helicopters, and ground crews combed the forest, shouting names, using scent dogs, and scanning for tracks. But the snow, which had since fallen again, had covered everything. Then, an eerie possibility emerged.
Want to support us and appreciate our craft? Click like, comment, and hit the subscribe button now.
Some speculated that the men might have been fleeing from someone. Perhaps they had given a stranger a ride. Someone who led them astray or frightened them enough to abandon their car. Others offered a psychological explanation. Could one of the men, especially Gary Mathias, who had a history of schizophrenia, have had an episode? Could he have panicked and led them away from safety? But even that theory had holes. Gary had been stable for over 2 years. He never missed his medication. And if he'd had an episode, why would the others, for grown men, follow him into a frozen wilderness? Their families clung to hope, but dread was creeping in. The Montego was the first physical proof that their boys had been somewhere. But now it only deepened the mystery. Search efforts intensified. Media coverage exploded. Families gave emotional interviews, pleading with their sons to come home. Gary's mother sobbed in front of TV cameras, "Please, just come home. No one is angry. We just want you safe." But the forest remained silent. As the days passed, the search became more desperate. Officers wondered if the men had taken shelter. Maybe they'd found a cabin, a shack, somewhere to hide from the cold. But there were no footprints, no discarded clothing, nothing. And then the snow came again, thick, blinding, and cruel. The car gave them hope, but the silence in the woods screamed louder than anything they could have imagined. Then, months later, when the snow finally melted, the nightmare truly began. By June 4th, 1978, the snow had melted. But with the thaw came no peace, only pain. For months, families had lived in limbo, hoping for a miracle, bracing for the worst. And then the call came. A group of motorcyclists had been exploring a service road deep in the Plumas National Forest. One of them caught a strange, putrid smell in the wind. It led him to a U.S. Forest Service trailer near a deserted area of a seasonal campground known as Bucks Lake. What he found inside that trailer would haunt investigators for decades. The trailer was meant for rangers working in the high country. During summer, it housed supplies, bunk beds, and heating equipment. But in winter, it sat empty, cold, desolate, isolated. Yet somehow someone had made it there, and they had stayed. Inside, on one of the beds, was the emaciated corpse of Ted Weiher. His body was fully clothed, stretched out under 8 sheets. His feet were badly frostbitten. His face was frozen in a tragic rictus. His body weighed just 120 pounds. He had lost nearly half his body weight. Nearby, searchers found his wallet, his gold necklace, and his nickel ring engraved with Ted. His shoes were gone. His feet had been severely frostbitten, perhaps even gangrenous. His beard had grown thick, suggesting he had survived for 8 to 13 weeks after the group went missing. But what disturbed investigators most wasn't just the condition of his body. It was what was around him. The trailer had food, canned meals, beans, fruit cocktail, meals ready to eat from the government stockpile. Over 24 cans had been opened and eaten, but dozens more remained untouched. Inside a nearby storage shed was a heating unit powered by propane. Still full, untouched. There were matches, books, heavy clothing. Everything the men would have needed to survive for months in the snow was there. They had found shelter, yes, but they hadn't used the tools to survive. Why? And then there was this. On a table inside the trailer was a gold watch. It didn't belong to any of the 5 men. No family recognized it. No initials. No connection. A clue? Or a red herring? Then came the most terrifying detail of all. Someone had been caring for Ted. At least for a time. He hadn't died quickly. His body showed no signs of physical trauma. There was no forced entry, no evidence of an attack. His cause of death? Starvation and exposure. But the sheets had been carefully tucked around him. Tightly, deliberately. Ted had intellectual disabilities. He couldn't have done that himself. Someone had covered him like a mother tucking in a child. So who had done it? The leading theory, Mathias. Gary's sneakers were found inside the trailer. His heavier boots were missing. No one knew when or why he had left. But if Gary had been there, why hadn't he used the propane heater? Why hadn't he led the others to survival? The situation spiraled into a maddening riddle. Searchers began canvassing the area. Over the next few days, they found more remains. Bill Sterling and Jack Madruga were found first, 11 miles away from the car, along a remote dirt road. They had tried to walk, possibly toward the trailer, but collapsed before ever making it. Then, 2 days later, searchers found Jack Hewitt's remains northeast of the trailer. His body had been ravaged by animals. All 3 were found in clothing not suited for the winter, just light jackets. No gloves, no thermal gear. This suggested something chilling. They weren't planning to be in the mountains at all. They were dressed for an evening out, not a trek into freezing terrain. Back at the trailer, investigators went through every inch. There were signs that at least one person, perhaps 2, had been living there for weeks. Food was eaten. Bedding was used. Yet no attempt had been made to get help. There were snow-covered roads leading back to civilization, but no signs anyone had tried to walk back. Instead, they'd waited. The other question, why didn't they all go to the trailer? Why were only Ted and possibly Gary there?
Want to support us and appreciate our craft? Click like, comment, and hit the subscribe button now.
If Gary was in that trailer, he had survived long enough to feed Ted. He had stayed long enough to remove his boots. Had he gone for help? Died trying? But if so, where was his body? Searchers fanned out in every direction. They combed ravines, overturned rocks, and checked every animal den. But Gary Mathias, the strongest, most capable of the five, was gone. No blood, no torn clothing, no bones, no hint of what happened to him. His family refused to give up. Gary would never leave the others behind, his mother said. He would have stayed as long as he could. If he left, it was to get help. And that's what made the case so painful. They had been so close to survival. If they had turned on the heat, if they had used the maps, if they had rationed the food, if they had left a note. But instead, all investigators found were echoes of desperation and silence. Ted Weiher may have survived for 2 months, slowly starving, frostbitten, trapped in a trailer surrounded by everything he needed, but never understanding how to save himself. What made it worse was that the trailer had been stocked for emergencies. It was supposed to be a lifeline, a place of safety. But for Ted, it had become a tomb. And Gary, his shoes left behind, had vanished without a single trace. They had made it out of the car. They had found shelter. They had each other. But something still went terribly wrong. And by the time anyone found them, only silence remained. 3 bodies outside, 1 body inside, and 1 man gone without a trace. What happened in those final, freezing days inside that trailer? And where is Gary Mathias? When the thaw came, it did not bring hope. It brought horror. In June 1978, 4 months after the disappearance, the first of the bodies was found. A small group of motorcyclists exploring the Plumas National Forest made a discovery that would reopen wounds for the families and shock even the seasoned investigators. Roughly 11 miles from the Montego, the remains of Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling were found scattered along opposite sides of a dirt road. Jack's body was partially consumed by animals. His car keys and wallet lay untouched nearby. Bill's body was found 50 feet away, reduced to bones. It appeared that the 2 men had tried to make it on foot, navigating deep snow, harsh terrain, and sub-zero temperatures in only light jackets. Neither had made it far. Their direction suggested they were heading toward the Forest Service trailer, but never made it. A few days later, Jack Hewitt's spine was discovered 2 miles northeast of the trailer site, in a brush-covered area. His clothing was found nearby, and dental records confirmed his identity. But this raised chilling questions. Why had these 3 men all ended up scattered so far apart? And why hadn't they stayed together? Search crews combed the area again, and the scene became more nightmarish with every find. The positioning of the bodies, the lack of appropriate gear, the near-complete absence of survival items, it all suggested utter desperation. Meanwhile, Ted Weiher's body had already been discovered inside the trailer. He had survived the longest. But Gary Mathias, the most capable, the one with military training and street smarts, was nowhere to be found. In the trailer, authorities had found Gary's tennis shoes. His own heavier boots were missing, as was any sign of him in the surrounding area. It was as though he had vanished into thin air. Speculation soared. Had Gary left the trailer alive, gone to get help, and succumbed somewhere else? Had he fallen victim to the cold or something else entirely? No other traces of him were ever found. No bones, no clothing, no clues. The mystery had gone from tragic to surreal. And yet, one chapter still remained. 4 bodies found, 1 man still missing. And the question that haunted everyone: did Gary Mathias escape? Or did he vanish into the woods forever? June 1978. 4 months had passed since the 5 young men from Yuba County vanished into the cold Northern California night. The snow was finally melting in the Plumas National Forest, and with it came the truth, at least part of it. The first body was discovered by a group of weekend motorcyclists. They stumbled upon an old Forest Service trailer, tucked deep in the woods, far from any well-traveled road. It was there, inside this weathered, cold structure, that they found Ted Weiher. Ted's body was lying on a bed. He was wrapped from head to toe in sheets, almost like a mummy. He hadn't simply frozen to death, he had wasted away. Ted had lost between 80 to 100 pounds, and his feet were badly frostbitten. His beard growth suggested he'd been alive for 8 to 13 weeks after the group had gone missing. And yet, inside the trailer were supplies. More than a dozen C-ration cans left untouched, matches, books, clothing, and even a propane tank that could have supplied heat. Ted had access to everything he needed to survive, and yet he had perished slowly in silence. Some of the food had been opened, but most remained unused. Authorities believed someone had been with him, at least for a time. On a table next to him were Gary Mathias's tennis shoes. Gary's sturdy military boots were gone. Did Gary leave the trailer to get help? Did something happen to him along the way? Or had he too fallen victim to the cold and isolation? The questions only deepened. 2 days after Ted's discovery, the bodies of Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling were found 11.4 miles from where the car had been abandoned. Jack was lying on his back on one side of the road. Bill's bones were scattered about 50 feet away, reduced by wildlife. Both had clearly died from exposure. Neither had made it to the trailer. Even more horrifying, Jack's keys and wallet lay beside him, untouched. They hadn't been robbed. There were no signs of violence, just cold and fear and the cruel wilderness.
Want to support us and appreciate our craft? Click like, comment, and hit the subscribe button now.
The discoveries continued. A few days later, the partial remains of Jack Hewitt were found 2 miles northeast of the trailer, near a stream. Only his spine, part of his skull, and some clothing were recovered. Dental records were needed to confirm his identity. For bodies, all in different states of decay, all victims of the same mysterious fate. But Gary Mathias was never found. His boots were missing, implying he had walked away, perhaps to find help. But the forest held no other trace of him. Searchers combed the area again for weeks. Every ravine, every creek bed, every cabin or mineshaft within a 20-mile radius. Nothing. No body. No bones. No clothing. No sign. The prevailing theory was chilling. Gary and Ted may have made it to the trailer together. Gary, who had mental health challenges but also street smarts and army training, might have tried to care for Ted. Maybe he melted snow for drinking water, opened some rations, wrapped Ted up in sheets to keep him warm. But then, something happened. Maybe Gary went for help and never made it back. Or maybe something darker happened. And so, the question haunts everyone still. Did Gary die out there, his remains still hidden in the vast expanse of the Sierra Nevada? Or did he escape, never wanting to be found? No one knows. This tragedy has endured for decades not only because of its bizarre nature, but because of what it teaches us. The wilderness is beautiful, but it is also indifferent. Here are some crucial lessons that might save lives. A plan before you go. Always tell someone your exact route, especially in rural or mountainous areas. Even if it's just a short drive, inform a friend or family member. A pack for the worst. Emergency kits with water, food, a flashlight, first aid, and warm clothing should be standard in vehicles, especially in the winter. Stay with your vehicle. Unless you're in imminent danger, staying with your vehicle increases your chances of being found, provides shelter, and is easier to locate. Mental health. If a group member struggles with mental health challenges, ensure they have their medication and know their limits. Cognitive and emotional disabilities can become life-threatening in high-stress situations. A shelter and fire first. If you must leave your car, prioritize finding or building shelter and creating heat. Exposure is a silent killer. Don't underestimate the terrain. The forest doesn't forgive mistakes. Always research your environment, even if you think you know it. Stay calm. Panic clouds judgment. The more fearful a group becomes, the more likely they are to make deadly decisions. If you're lost, stop moving. Find a visible place, make noise periodically, and stay put unless you're certain of where you're going. Help others understand. If you're organizing a trip with people who have developmental disabilities, walk through every step of the journey together. Repetition builds comfort and understanding. Listen to your instincts. If something feels wrong, turn back, stay put, or seek help immediately. Intuition can be a life-saving tool. They were 5 friends, excited for a basketball game, proud of their team, loved by their families. In a matter of hours, they were swallowed by the woods, by silence, and by mystery. Today, we remember them, not just as victims of the unknown, but as a reminder to never take the wild for granted, and to always look out for one another. In memory of Ted Weiher, Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, Jack Hewitt, and Gary Mathias. 1978. Never forgotten.
Want to support us and appreciate our craft? Click like, comment, and hit the subscribe button now.